Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's panel on energy and class justice. My name is Kelly Henderson, and I'm the K-12 Education Coordinator for Chatham University's Sustainable Eden Hall campus in Gibsonia, Pennsylvania. This event is part of a social justice and sustainability series, which is running from October to April. Each month is focused on the connections between different environmental issues and forms of social identity-based justice. Although we're digging more deeply tonight into energy justice and class justice specifically, it's important to understand that this work is intersectional. Intersectionality is a term that describes the way that race, class, gender, and other identities intersect or overlap. And it was coined by Black feminist scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. Also, so many seemingly different issues in our communities are deeply interconnected. Energy justice is deeply connected to housing justice, transit justice, food justice, and so much more. So in the end, all of the focus environmental and social issues from each month of this series are connected, and we have to view everything that we're trying to address in our communities as interconnected in order to make lasting progress. So we encourage you to listen for examples of intersectionality and systems thinking, the connections between social and environmental issues throughout the event. After tonight's panel, we encourage everyone to also turn up for the Energy and Oppression Inspire Speaker Series event. It's a partner event hosted by the Green Building Alliance coming up Wednesday, January 27th from 1 to 3:30 p.m. While this panel tonight features Western Pennsylvania regional speakers, that event will feature national voices. Then join us for a discussion group at the end of the month and early next month on energy and class justice in particular. That's on Thursday, February 4th from 7 to 8 p.m. Next month, we'll be focusing on community development, ability, and age justice with a special focus on housing and transportation through similar panel events, discussion groups, and resource sharing. Tonight's event and this whole month's focus on energy and class justice is brought to you in collaboration with the following co-host organizations, all based in Western Pennsylvania: Center for Cofield Justice, Reimagine Beaver County, Southwestern Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project, Land Art Generator Initiative, and the Green Building Alliance. We encourage you to learn more about their work and get involved. In addition to getting involved with the work of tonight's panelists, we're super excited to introduce them to you. So without further ado, here's HR Liotta, tonight's panel moderator, here to introduce herself and then all of our panelists. Thanks, HR.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is HR Liotta, and I will be moderating this panel. I'm an arts management and music major at Chatham University. I also work as a K-12 sustainability educator at Eden Hall, and I am really thankful to have the opportunity to moderate this panel. With that, I will introduce you to tonight's speakers. Speaking tonight, we have Ashley Funk, Executive Director of the Mountain Watershed Association, Henry McKay, an NABCEP Photovoltaic Associate and Program Director with Solar United Neighbors of Pennsylvania, Masoud Sayles, a Project Manager for Permaculture Design at Grounded in Pittsburgh, Michael Bagdes-Canning, a member of several organizations in Pennsylvania and beyond, which include Marcellus Outreach Butler, the Better Path Coalition, Beyond Extreme Energy, and the PA Poor People's Campaign, NaTisha Washington, environmental justice organizer with One Pennsylvania, Lois Bower-Bjornson, a field organizer with the Clean Air Council and the founder of Frackland Tours, which give people a first-hand account of what it is like to live and grow up with oil and gas in your backyard. Odessa Bjornson, a 6th grader in the McMillion School District, and also a resident of the most heavily fracked county in Pennsylvania, and Gunnar Bjornson, a freshman in the McMillion School District, and also a resident of the most heavily fracked county in Pennsylvania. Thank you all for being here. Now, if you could all turn your cameras on, my first question for all of you is, how are you all personally connected to energy and class justice, either through your work, your personal experience, or both?
Personally, I would say that I'm connected to all of that just by living in it day to day. For personally myself, And for where I live, it's one of the most fracked counties in our state. It's just hard, and it's just really just annoying, and it affects me a lot. And that's just how I get to deal with it and get to know.
Yeah, so I live in Butler County, which is not the most heavily fracked county in Pennsylvania, but it's certainly one of the most heavily fracked counties. And it's fair to say, though, that I think we're all on frontline communities. So I experience this whole thing we're talking about tonight through my role as husband, father, and grandfather, through my role as an organizer, and through my role as an elected official.
And my work at Solar United Neighbors, you know, we do have solar in the name, but we're not a traditional environmental organization in lots of ways. And what we try to do is build what we call energy democracy, and that's trying to transform our energy system from one that is largely controlled by monopolies, where regular people don't have a lot of control over how energy is generated, but they have to deal with the effects of it, the pollution, and the wealth and economic benefits from an energy system are concentrated among a few companies. And we're trying to use solar to build an energy system that shares that more broadly, shares those benefits, and also does it while, you know, protecting the environment and our air.
Yeah, my work, I've found that in fighting air pollution, a lot of times we have to have a lot of conversations about these companies that pollute the air. So I haven't directly worked a lot with, you know, energy councils, but I've had to in recent time just to deal with the air pollution issues.
In terms of my personal life, I live in a community that's heavily impacted by the utilization of energy, again, through air pollution. But in my professional life, I work in various communities who are similarly impacted, again, by the rampant use of fossil fuel energy in particular. And as such, I represent them.
I live in southern Westmoreland County, northern Fayette County, and a lot of our history is through coal mining. And just a couple miles down the road from me is one of the coal mines that actually mines the coal that goes to the Clairton Coke Works, which is one of the major sources of coal pollution within Pittsburgh. Yeah, and so the coal mining history here had a big impact and still has a big impact. It's happened for centuries. And growing up, my family was poor throughout the majority of my life. And in our backyard, we had a big ash dump. That's what we called it, or a slag dump. There's those big black piles of coal waste that you see all throughout southwestern Pennsylvania. And that dust would always blow into our house. And we would play in it. Honestly, we didn't know any better. And I know that people still do. And so for me, there's a big connection between the ways that these environmental issues impact people, and they tend to impact people who are particularly poor or working class folks within these communities. And there's a lot of different intersections with that work, but that is a lot of how it plays out in our communities.
Well, I'm Odessa Bjornson, and growing up with fracking it's not fun. When they were fracking a well pad down the road from our house, it would keep me awake and I could not sleep at all. And it was just horrible, especially with the trucks and just the smell and the thickness of the air. It's just horrible, and it's very unnecessary for this to happen where there are renewable energy resources, but it's just very unnecessary.
Hi, I'm Lois Bower-Bjornson, and I live in the most heavily fracked county in Pennsylvania, Washington County. I did grow up here along the Monongahela River, so I'm no stranger to industry. Very similar to Ashley's background. I played on slate dumps. I can remember, seeing the bucket on fire, going up to the slate dumps, and did all those kind of things, swam in the river, So again, I know what industry does when it comes, and I know what it does when it leaves. Now I have 4 children, and you've met 2 of them. And so, they are, I hate to say in the cycle, they're living back in the area again, because we moved to, have fresh air and places for our kids to run and play. And unfortunately, things are not that way. So within my work, I work with local communities to help people to have better zoning ordinances and better oil and gas ordinances to at least help where they live be a little bit safer.
Thank you all for sharing all of that. My next question is kind of going off of that a little bit. What first made you aware of the inequities in energy and class justice? Or in other words, what radicalized you and inspired you to take action?
Well, personally, for me, I don't think I have any inequality with energy. It's just how it affects me personally, because it just feels wrong to me that this happens, and it's just so unnecessary personally. It just bothers everybody around me, and it just seems quite unnecessary to me. I can't really put it any other way. It just needs to be stopped. It's not worth it.
So in 2010, our eldest daughter, Jennifer, told my wife, Karen, and I that we were about to become grandparents. And that announcement really served as a wake-up call. Karen and I started to question what sort of world we're leaving for our children and our grandchildren. But it was also a time of personal reflection for me. I've always considered myself an environmentalist, but I started to recognize that too often I didn't act on what I knew was happening all around me. Participating in the March on Blair Mountain, a week-long mountaintop removal direct action, changed my mind about how change takes place. But what really drove home the whole concept of environmental racism was driven home to me when I went to visit the Navajo reservation in the Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico. I mean, there has been like centuries of horrible things happening just for profit.
I work in environmental field. That's what my training is in, and this is where I wanted my career to be. And I've always had helping solve climate change as my primary career goal. I can't think of a single moment where I felt like everything switched for me and I was radicalized. I do feel like the last 4 years, a lot of us were being radicalized in a lot of ways. And but when I started my career, I kind of saw climate change and environmental degradation as largely it's like a technical problem. It could be solved with the right application technology, the right policies in place, and maybe the right economic incentives. And my thinking started to evolve, and this is kind of like a lot of the environmental field and the environmental nonprofit world was evolving in the same way at the same time, to start to see it more as an issue of justice and seeing how we can't really separate this into this technocratic problem that can be solved with technology, but it is inextricably tied with issues of economic inequality, of racial injustice, of inequalities in political power. And so now I try to frame my career mission in terms of justice and in terms of who is being impacted, who is experiencing justice, and what are the systems of power that are making things this way.
Yeah, when I was growing, so I grew up in Pittsburgh. I grew up in the Wilkinsburg community. And when I got asthma, I just thought that it was just a common thing that, children got. So I didn't think nothing of it, growing up and then into adulthood. It was just something that I dealt with. And when I got into environmental work and started working in the Homewood community, I started seeing all these statistics on how the vast majority of children that were in these communities had asthma. And then there were a lot of seniors and older adults who had respiratory and heart issues from the pollution that was coming into their community. And just recently, just listening to the public hearing for the Clarendon Coke Works for their for the Allegheny Health Department, hearing all the stories of their children having asthma and them growing up with asthma, and now they have these severe respiratory issues. It just kind of like dawned on me that like all these communities, especially communities that had mostly residents, were having like all these respiratory issues and like children were suffering from that. And then it just made me think about how long this was going on, because my father's family lived in Clarendon. I can remember playing outside there, and then like my nose would start burning and I didn't know why. I just thought that, maybe it was allergies or something like that. And come to find out that it was because of the pollution that was in the air. So I had like a recent igniting to be more proactive when it comes to these issues, because, I knew that pollution was an issue in Pittsburgh, but I didn't think about the factories that were still here polluting the air and how it can not only affect the community that's in, but then communities near it as well. Because on the call that we had, there were people from Edgewood, there were people from Swissville, there are people from Braddock that were all complaining about the same area and the same issue and how it was like coming into their community. So now I'm just kind of like, oh, well, we have to help all of these communities, not just focusing on one of them. I would hope that if we do that, we can save, these younger children from having to grow up and deal with these respiratory issues and get older and have to deal with all these medical issues that the seniors now have. So that was kind of like what started to motivate me.
Well, when I started doing all this stuff, it was mainly because, my mom got involved into it. And in a couple of years, I was like, maybe it'll get fixed. Maybe everyone will understand that this is bad. But then it just continuously got worse and it did not stop. And it still hasn't. And that's the whole reason that we got to get it fixed, or else for our future people in, I don't know, 150 years, it might seem like a long time, but it's not. The world will just be completely different, very different. And it's going to be insane. And if we don't fix it now, it's never going to get fixed.
Like NaTisha, I grew up in Allegheny County, McKeesport area, and I experienced respiratory issues, no doubt from the Clarendon Coke Works right up the river. In addition, just recognizing that a lot of my peers everywhere experiencing the same sort of plight really motivates me to hop in here and try and do something about it. Beyond just the air quality, though, the amount of environmental degradation generally is just seeing litter in the streets, illegal dumping on vacant land anywhere in the area. It just infuriates me, and I really can't stand the amount of disrespect that humanity expresses for the place that we all live.
Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing. It's really interesting to be in a dialogue whenever there are people that are experiencing the impact of the end product of an impact that we're experiencing down here. So we're mining the coal, and the coal is going up the river to Pittsburgh, and then it's continuing its cycle. And that's how it's been for centuries. Our communities down here in Fayette and Westmoreland counties have for a long time produced the coal that was shipped up to Pittsburgh to make steel. So the coal is it's through a coking process that then that is needed to make steel, and coal is a part of that process. And so for me, I didn't think it was weird. It was very normal for me to see these big slate dumps and see these abandoned mine sites, see creeks that ran orange from abandoned mine water. And it was not something that I thought was strange. It just seemed like how it should be or was. And it wasn't until I started expanding my bubble in high school and then into college. I actually left Pennsylvania for college, and I would talk about some of these issues, and people would look at me like I was an alien, just like, what do you mean your creeks are orange? and I was like, oh, yours aren't? Like, you didn't play on big ash dumps when you were a kid? Like, what do you mean? And I started to make the connections, realizing that a big reason why it's acceptable for our communities to have these types of environmental issues is because they're predominantly areas where a lot of poor folks live. In our communities, a lot of the population is white, still poor, and then so it's experiencing one type of environmental class justice, and there's other types of environmental justice also when it comes to race, and a lot of that around Clairton Cook Works. A lot of those communities, as we're mentioning, are Black, and so and also experiencing class justice. So there's all these intersections that are coming together. And I think it's really important to recognize that class is something that is pulling us all together, right? So there's I think that there might be a lot of ways that these companies want us to feel like these communities are different and they're divided, but actually there's so much that connects us. And if we just realized it, we'd be like, hey, we're all experiencing these issues, these environmental issues. They're impacting our health, they're impacting our children, they're impacting our clean water. And it's because we don't hold the wealth, the money, but that connects us beyond class, beyond race, and these other differences that are put onto us in so many different ways. So I started to make those connections as I got older, and then all of a sudden that was when everything started really clicking for me, and realizing that so much of what we are facing could be solved if people came together and realized that it was that maybe at the top of it's the corporations, the people who hold so much wealth in this country that are in like maybe this capitalist system that is causing so much of these problems. And whenever you're really looking at it in that big systems level, that's whenever you're like, whoa, all of a sudden some of the solutions or even some of the divisions that you might have been taught don't make sense anymore.
I just want to make a quick comment on what you were saying, Ashley, because recently, for whatever random reason, I was looking at the billionaires list, and there's so many people on that list that are involved in the mining industry that I was like, that's a lot of power for that industry to have, because it wasn't like it was just one person or two people. It was like, I want to say I counted 7 people from how far down I went on the list, and I didn't even go through the whole list. And I was just like, well, 7 people on the top billionaires list, and they were pretty high up, are mining industry people, then that means that we have a way bigger problem when it comes to like how we deal with this in economics. And it does become a big class issue, because it's like, how do you fight that? Especially when we were talking about like Clairton Cook Works and how they're just paying $1 million in fines. And they're just like, oh, well, if we pay even more money for this equipment, then we kind of like lose out economically. And it's like, okay, cool, but you have to make that sacrifice for the benefit of, the people who live here. And it's kind of just like they're, especially the people who like work there, it's kind of like choosing between like health and the financial stability of the community, which is a hard issue as well, because then you're like, people who work there, who built their whole life around it, and families that built their life around it, how do you tell them, like, we can't stop them from firing you, but they need to put this money that they have into improving, you know, their system. And it's like, we don't have the power to like tell them what to do with their business. So it's not like a promise that we can really keep, but it's just like an unfortunate position to be put in.
Yeah, but there's more of us. Like, even if we don't necessarily have the material, the wealth that they have, there are more of us. And that, I think, is part of what is really exciting, is if we realize that we have power in the people, and can come together across division. And even because there are a lot of divisions geographically and racial divides. People often talk about like these urban rural divides between Pittsburgh and and outside of Pittsburgh, but there's a lot of connections between class, and where the communities that are being impacted are often the poor communities. And if we can get together on that thread, then I think that we have a lot of power, even if the top billionaires are in the oil and coal industries. Yeah, that's what we need.
I just want to emphasize that, you know, that concentration of economic power is also political power in a lot of ways. And it's power to control, you know, to influence legislation. It's power to control the regulators who are supposed to be making the rules over your industry. And it's really, you know, it's really easier for them to translate their wealth into that economic power and change the rules of the game. And, you know, we do have that strength in numbers, and, you know, that's hard. The challenge is that's harder to like rally that kind of strength than it is just to, you know, pay for a really top-notch lobbyist. And in that building of people powers is basically that's organizing. You know, it's people getting that consciousness, what we're just talking about now, understanding what you know, what the problem is and who's making the problem, and then it's learning how to make change, finding other people like you know, kind of what we're doing now, and then using those tools to leverage your own unique kind of power to combat that wealth and political power.
Yeah, thank you all so much for that. So it seems like there's a lot of discussion about sort of like these systems and these cycles that just kind of continue. So what I wanted to ask was, how do our current energy systems help to like perpetuate this economic inequality, and how can that be remedied? I can start. I'm sure that people are going to have some good insights after we get started. But I think first, for me, a lot of what a big issue is where our government puts their money. So this concept called a subsidy, it's whenever the government pretty much gives grants or money to industries. And all of a sudden, when they do that, it makes it so they can sell their products for cheaper, because they don't have to invest as much money in them. They don't have to depend on the consumer to pay that cost, that true cost. So within Pennsylvania, we give millions of dollars, I think probably billions of dollars, of subsidies to energy industries. I know it happens for coal mining all the time, and it has happened for a long time. And within a recent big subsidy that went out was to Shell Oil, who is constructing a petrochemical plant. It's a place where you make plastics. They're constructing in Beaver County in a town called Monaca along the Ohio River. And for that plant, the subsidy was $1.6 billion to Shell. And for the number of jobs that would create, that was about $2.75 million for every permanent job. So I just imagine $2.7 million for every permanent job. Imagine what that type of money could do if we invested that in energy efficiency programs, in in solar so that people could have energy on their homes that they didn't have to pay for. So these companies that we're talking about that have so much money, they're getting this money from the government when they don't need it. And then all of a sudden in these other communities where people are really struggling, they don't have the resources they need. It's really hard to pay our electric bills. Like even though, and we're facing shutoffs for electricity, or we're dealing with the impacts of the gas well or the coal mine down the road. And so I personally think that the government should be investing money in sustainable solutions that keep us, so we don't have to depend on extraction for the rest of our lives, that don't perpetuate climate change and other issues in our communities, that keep us healthy. I think that a big role in addressing these inequalities is the role that our government has, and that is run by our policymakers. But I'm sure people have other things to say about that too. But I wanted to get us started there.
I have a lot to say. First I'll add that if you talk to a typical Pennsylvania legislator for like 10 seconds about solar, like the first thing they'll say is like, but it can't exist. It doesn't work without subsidies. And it's not exactly true. It's just a little less economic without subsidies. But then they'll turn around and they pass these huge subsidies for like the cracker plant. Or, they ignore the biggest subsidy of all for fossil fuels is not having to pay for all the pollution, not having to pay for the carbon emissions. We all eventually pay for that in the form of environmental degradation, health, but they don't have to. So that's effectively a subsidy. The other point I wanted to make is, the way our utility system is set up is we have a few companies controlling, acting basically as monopolies. And that's kind of how the system had to work with the technology we were using. You had to have one, large company control the power plant, and then, the grid that distributed the energy to all of us. And the way it was supposed to work, what was called the utility compact, the regulatory compact, was, all right, they're going to do this and they're going to make a reliable electric grid. They're going to sell us power at a reasonable price. And what we'll do is we will pay them, a fair cost for that power with a little bit so they can make a profit. And that was the deal. That compact is essentially broken. Maybe it was always broken, because what we're getting out of this is not just electricity, but all of this pollution that we don't have control over. We don't have control over, how our energy is being generated. How slowly these companies are trying to decarbonize on their own when they are even trying on their own to, reduce their fossil fuel emissions. So it doesn't seem like a deal that's working for us anymore. And so we should really be thinking about ways that this whole electricity generation system can change to be a good deal for us again.
Yeah, so I kind of want to tell a story about a community in Butler County that's been without water for 10 years. The Woodlands, their water was polluted or poisoned by Rex Energy when they fracked. And why can something like that happen? And it goes back to what Henry and Ashley were both talking about, is that the rules aren't written to protect communities, they're written to protect industry. And so it's just a cost of business for them to come in and ruin water, but then the communities are left without it. So the Woodlands folks have been going to a water bank for 8 years now, get 20 to 25 gallons of water per family per week. We're talking about up to 60 families every week. It's crazy. And going back to that lobbyist thing, there are 203 state representatives in Pennsylvania. Amazingly, there are also 203 lobbyists for the oil and gas industry in Harrisburg. It's a sick thing. We need to get rid of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of forgot the question. I've been in meetings all day, so forgive me. So I'm just going to respond to, what everybody's been saying. One of the things that I saw bothered me as far as this change in energy efficiency is, I went to a lot of eco district conferences and them trying to make these communities more sustainable, but then finding out that where they were was Etna and Millville and Lawrenceville, these communities that, were one, able to do it, and two, didn't need it as much as other communities. I was kind of just bewildered, where I was like, so you have money and resources to invest in the community that's not even what 5-10 minutes from Homewood, which I was working in, and they can get all these solar panels, they can get all these green spaces fixed up, they can get all these energy efficient systems set up in their community, and y'all, parole them and y'all show them on your, slideshows as, oh, look at this community and look how sustainable they are and look at all the stuff that they've done. But when a community like ours kind of acts like, hey, can we get some solar panels? Can we get, some stormwater management? Can we these systems that they're having out in Etna and Millville? And then they're like, oh, well, the next community we're going to is Lawrenceville. It's like, why are we going to communities that don't really need these systems and ignoring the ones that do? And then saying, oh, well, we need more resources and money to help your community. And it's like, but you did it already, but you didn't do it in the communities that need it. And it just became a very frustrating thing, because it's like, we're capable of doing it and we're able to do it. So you've shown us that it's possible, but you still deny us that opportunity to have the same thing. So that's kind of like been a thing as far as like systems building that's a little bothering to me.
I'd just like to hop in and be a little bit solution oriented as we're getting a little doom and gloom here. So we've been talking about how these subsidies are for energy infrastructure and industry, without realizing that it's very particular which industries are being subsidized. I think Henry alluded to the fact that solar can be successful even without subsidy, whereas we know oil and gas cannot be. But thinking about where we direct these subsidies is very important. Thinking about things like agro solar and integrated grazing and energy systems is very important. Diversifying our energy portfolio in a way that allows us to reap multiple benefits, i.e. Utilizing systems such as retrofitting coal-fired power plants, which use steam turbine infrastructure, retrofitting them to instead produce biochar in a waste-to-energy mechanism. Things like that can definitely allow us to kind of remedy the energy system that we have right now, which is incredibly broken, and bring it back into balance, not only with the economics and social aspects of society, but also the environmental aspects as well.
Well, my big problem with it is that they don't care about other people. They just think about themselves, and they think about what they can get rather than what people who need things. Like, let's just put it in a way, they'll go help a wealthy, a good community that has nothing wrong with it. It's a well-made community. Yet they'll help that one, but then there will be another community that will just be absolutely horrible, where they have so many different issues that I probably wouldn't even have enough fingers to count them. And it's just absolutely insane, because they'll help the people who don't need help rather than help the people who really, really need the help that they can get. It's like, if you can get anything, they'll take it. Like, if you need just something, just like give them some help,
Thank you all. So what do you think makes these issues with our energy system? What makes these issues of energy and class so prominent in Pennsylvania and in even like the Pittsburgh area specifically?
Um,
Oh, I'll let you go, Gunnar, sorry.
okay. Well, I think that for the state, it's simply because it's just more about money rather than helping people. I think they keep doing it. And it just seems kind of stupid that they think some things can just last forever because nothing's that way. But, they just keep lining their own pockets. That's what it's for. It's just all about here. And since they have a lot of fracking plans here and there's no legislation to stop that, or that hasn't been put into place yet, they can just do what they want. So without any laws, we can't do anything. Without people that don't listen, we can't do anything. So it's kind of, we can influence them, but it's all up to them. It's all up to the vote they make for the laws that ban this.
Hi. I think it's the way it always has been in the state of Pennsylvania and really not all of Appalachia. The mining companies used to own all the homes that the miners lived in. They bought things with a thing called script in West Virginia. If the husband died, then if there wasn't a son, the wife was, an indentured sexual servant until the debts were paid off. I think sadly that's just how it's been, and people have even through the years accepted that for some strange reason, because if they're able to get a job and they were poor, you accepted what the risks were and accepted that. And industry also has a way of giving people some money and then encouraging them to spend it. Also, they're indebted to them as well. And thanks, Ashley, because script was used in Pennsylvania. I appreciate that. So yeah, I think it's something that has been part of our culture, and people have accepted it, and it still goes on today. So in other words, the people that have the money are in power, and the people that don't, well, they have to work for you, or that's the only choice that they've been given.
I think the issue underlying the majority of this is kind of the fact that Pennsylvania has rich geologic resources, which folks have been exploiting since they landed here. I mean, beginning with the fact that we deforested Pennsylvania several times just for the sake of utilizing those materials, regenerated. We've still got forests here today, but it's just incredible how much greed we have for energy, and really just thinking about ways that we can scale back on not just in individual consumption, but also culturally, thinking about ways in which products can be designed so that they utilize less energy, not just talking about things that utilize electricity, but rather just in the product design process. You don't have to have a chair that's made of plastic, which had to be extracted as oil, shipped around, processed a bunch. You can have a chair made of wood, which serves a very similar purpose, but has a significantly smaller carbon footprint and environmental impact. I could go on. Let's let somebody else go.
Yeah, kind of to what everybody else is saying, like many other brownfield cities, we just have such a long history of this here that it's become part of the culture so much that a lot of people have a hard time just kind of like letting it go and changing it. So it kind of, when you say, hey, let's change this, let's, do away with this, like people feel personally offended by it as well. And like, oh, it's always been like that, things are okay. Like, I know I've had, unfortunately, many conversations where people will come to me and be like, oh, I've lived here, all my life. It's always been like this. I'm fine. I don't care. And I'm just like, it doesn't, just because you're used to it doesn't make it right. And because it's such an indebted culture for people, it's hard to kind of like push them to change it. And, without having people like care, it reduces our numbers of who we can impact and get to push these things forward. Fortunately, it's becoming like a rising thing, and people are starting to understand and learn more about it, and they'll get older or they'll get sicker, and then they'll start being like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And then we have more people advocating. But until we have like a culture of people, especially like the younger generation that's becoming adults, caring about it and pushing it forward, it'll keep us where we are if we don't continue to impact those people and change their minds. So hopefully we can make this happen.
Thanks. Also, what NaTisha and Masoud, what you just shared, it just is making me think about, well, first I was just thinking, we're the Pittsburgh Steelers still. Steelers are people who make steel, which you need to extract coal. It's just so ingrained in so much of our culture and the things that we really find important. And also, I have so many conversations with people who are like, well, it's so much better. You used to drive to Pittsburgh and it was just black. You went through the tunnels and it was just black, and it's so much better now. And just go telling these horror stories of how it used to be. And yes, it has gotten better, but we're still one of the worst in the country in terms of air quality. And that is something to be aware of. And I wanted to note too, just something that Masoud was talking about is part of what the root of so much of this is colonization. Like, this land is Shawnee, Delaware, and Seneca land, and it is indigenous land. And prior to the colonization of this land, we didn't have these problems. I mean, there's still some small tracts of old growth forest, and it really, when I walk through those, it's just unbelievable to think about how Pennsylvania and so much of this area used to be so beautifully taken care of, and such a healthy environment. And what I've learned from different indigenous people that I've talked to who are really who are indigenous organizers and environmental advocates, it's just like these things that we call natural resources that that people that look like me, who are white, who aren't from this country originally, coal is seen as the liver. It cleans water. So if you think of like charcoal filters and things like that, a lot of times it will clean water. And it's part of, and I'm not a geologist, but I have an environmental science background. So don't out there, don't quote me on this, but it's my understanding is it's part of the rock formation that helps water that's flowing underground. Coal traps like the different heavy metals and everything. So whenever that's extracted, there's nothing to clean that, and that's what causes some of the pollution that we see down the road whenever coal is extracted. So I think when we think about the world and as a living system, like it's all a living system, that it's not just the trees and the water that we're used to, but also the geological formation underneath of it is also a living system. And I think that is something that the people who are the original stewards of this land recognize very much. And that was something that's been lost. And I think that contributes to issues here and then all over the colonized United States. It's just really important, I think, for us to remember that this land is not ours. It never has been.
I just wanted to kind of echo what NaTisha said about, people are used to this, so they put up with it because they think it's a good thing. My state representative, I went to a lobby day in Harrisburg, and we had invited actually Ned Katire from Washington County to talk about the terrible cancer cluster in Washington County. And so I went to invite him, to my rep, to come hear this talk. And he said he didn't want to go. And I said, why? And he said, well, we have lots of cancers up in Oil City too. So, I mean, it's like, I wonder why you have so many cancers in Oil City. It's because, this is the same industry that's doing in Washington County. So yeah, it's like, yeah, we just do it.
Yeah, thank you all for that. Really quickly, I want to just address one other thing, which is Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day was celebrated at the start of this week, this Monday. And he once warned against three major evils, which he identified as the evil of racism, the evil of poverty, and the evil of war. How do you feel that you face these evils in fighting for class and energy equity?
I think it's important to recognize that these evils are all connected. The current iteration of the Poor People's Campaign adds two other evils: ecological devastation and the false narrative of Christian nationalism. But the same evil that allows us to poison our brothers and sisters on the Laguna Reservation, or the folks in the woodlands, their water, or the folks in Clairton, doesn't think twice about waging wars on folks in the Middle East or wherever. I mean, it's all there. The same system that celebrates rising stock markets turns its back when Americans are homeless or facing food insecurity or dying from cancer. I mean, these things are all interconnected. And I think that's one of the things we need to think about. NaTisha talked about it, and Ashley talked about it too, is, we, the working class folks from rural areas to Clairton to Fayette County, we're all fighting the same stinking system. So we need to get together and work. So, I mean, I just love that whole thing from King, and now we need to put it to work.
Yeah, definitely. Oh no, go ahead.
Michael, I couldn't agree more. I think that, like, at the root of this all is just the insane greed that we've kind of come to idolize, really. I mean, look at all the most famous people, other than those who have achieved, incredible singular scientific achievement or something like that. Which, by the way, very few of those folks actually become quite famous. But, like, we idolize wealth, and it's wrong, frankly. There are more valuable types of wealth than coin alone. The wealth of friends, the wealth of family, the wealth of interconnectedness in our society, support for one another, and resiliency within our communities are all types of wealth that are not necessarily directly tied to monetary gain. And I think that that's important to recognize as we attempt to fight these evils of racism, poverty, and war.
Yeah, I know in the work that I've done, I've come to know that this is very much a battleground, unfortunately, when it comes to fighting these issues, because there is a lot of us versus them, especially when it comes to class. There, the people who have the resources and have the things that they need and can eat, drink, sleep happily and breathe clean air. And then there's, the other side of people who don't have these resources, who have to kind of figure out, how to clean their water, how to get access to food, how to have cleaner air. And, as people are starting to see the differences on both sides, there are people on the other side that are now starting to see, oh, they don't have the things that we have. And then there are the people who didn't have resources who always knew, and they're kind of just like battling out to try to fight for resources, which is kind of an unfair thing. Like, you shouldn't have to fight for a resource that, should feed you or house you or, give you clean water for you to drink or air for you to breathe. I mean, those are simple basic needs that people should have. So then when it comes to, a lot of us on this call who are like organizers or nonprofit workers that are in the middle of this battleground trying to fight for the people who don't have resources, then we end up having to fight against these people who have the resources or who are the ones that are polluting this area. And it's it's a hard fight. It's very stressful. I know a lot of people that have had to go therapy because of it. And it's kind of an unfair burden that we as nonprofit workers have to take on, this burden of giving resources to a community that deserves these resources. Like, I know at OnePA, when COVID happened and, utility issues started to happen, we gave our COVID relief care to them. And it was just like, we are taking money that out of our pockets that we had to ask foundations for, to give resources to people that were kind of just being ignored. It was like, oh, well, we'll pause it and people should be okay. We'll give them a $600 stimulus. They'll be fine. And it's kind of like, no, they need way more than that. They need way more resources than that. They're already at an unfair advantage. And now we're in a pandemic where they're at even more of an unfair advantage, and you're leaving it to an organization or nonprofits that have to fight for grants to help them, instead of being like, hey, here's some resources, here's what you need, let's give you some of that. Instead, you still try to cover up and you still try to fight for what's yours. And it's kind of like, y'all have all the things that y'all need. Y'all don't think y'all can share some of those resources with us? Like, you have more than enough. And it's just like somebody was saying, I shouldn't have to fight for my slice of cake. Like, we should all have a piece of this cake. And it just feels like we're fighting for crumbs of a cake that should be shared with all of us. I didn't know how to end that, but I mean.
Awesome. Thank you, NaTisha. I wanted to, I think, in spirit of that question, and maybe I'll give everyone a little bit of homework since I know we're running out of time, but Martin Luther King Jr., the last speech that he gave was beyond Vietnam, talking about the Vietnam War. And in that speech, he made all of these connections between environmental destruction, internationalism, and what we were doing to people like within the United States, within Vietnam, and then also talking about class and classism and how that pulls us apart. And he was really starting to make all of these connections and really start to unify people, not only among class within the United States, but among class in the entire world. And I definitely recommend people listen. There you can find on YouTube. It's Beyond Vietnam. It is really an incredible speech that pulls so much of this together. And I think that, these problems have only been exacerbated. I remember reading in 2017, it was that 0.1% of the global population took 82% of the world's wealth. So 0.1% took 82% of the world's wealth. So we're in the United States, that is definitely reflected. There were graphics that's like the majority of the world's wealth could sit on one school bus together. So we're really experiencing such incredible class divides within the United States and among the world. And people talk about how Martin Luther King, one of the things that really started worrying those in power was the fact that he was making those connections. And perhaps that's what led to his assassination, that he was making those connections. So I definitely recommend looking into that more and starting to understand how all of these connect, and how the inequality that we face in wealth around the world, it does such a disservice to humanity.
Thank you. There is an audience question, and we're pretty much out of time, so I apologize for that. But the audience question was, what are your opinions on the damages that capitalism has done to our environment via industry and the economy? And I feel like you've all already talked about that a little bit, but like maybe not specifically, not specifically about like capitalism. But does anyone have any last thoughts on that?
I just say that King speech that Ashley was talking about addresses that. So yeah, go check it out.
And I just want to echo what I was talking about earlier, not only just capitalism in the economy, but also how colonization and the genocide of indigenous people played into all of that, plays a big role. And yeah, I think we get into a long topic, but a long conversation, but I mean, they're clearly the environment and the things that we all depend upon, air and water, have been really severely damaged as a result of these systems.
Yeah, and maybe this is a little bit aside from the question, but you know, the kind of, a lot of us work in the nonprofit sector, and we are funded, you know, a lot by philanthropic foundations, and that money ultimately comes from capitalists a couple generations ago. And this is kind of like part of the system is, you know, you create all these losers in this economic and environmental degradation with our traditional capitalist economy. And then the people who have accumulated all this wealth literally have so much left over, you know, by the time they can't even spend it all by the time they die. And so it becomes this foundation, and then it's granted out to do nice things, like pay my salary. But, you know, this isn't a solution, you know, where you concentrate all this wealth and you create these problems, and then later on you have these foundations deciding how we're going to spend money. You know, like Aetna is going to get the you know, eco district support, but it's not going to go to Homewood or Larimer. You know, this isn't the solution. You know, we often think of the nonprofit world as kind of solving these problems, and you know, we are obviously all working to try to solve them, but you know, we're living off the largesse of these injustices in the past, and it's hard to think about how our role in that, I think.
I mean, I just feel like that how this affects capitalism, it's just all about decimation. It's about personal pocket lining. That's it. I mean, I don't think there's any other simpler way to put it. It's just decimation from other people that doesn't belong to us simply for own financial gain. It's just, I doesn't seem right to me. Like, I don't see the point of decimating things simply to have money that you can't even spend all of it. And then just when you die, just like, yeah, it's just, I don't know how to explain it. It's just wrong.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank all of you so much for speaking on tonight's panel. We are at the end. We've gone a little bit over. I do apologize. But I feel like it's been a really great discussion. For everyone who has spoken on this panel, thank you so much. For all of the people who are watching, thank you so much for coming. And you can definitely continue to be engaged with this work if you're interested. We do have more events coming up this month. We have partners who have events coming up. If you just keep an eye on our social media, you can hear all about that. So yeah, thank you all, and everyone have a good night.
Well, thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you.